It's been a busy couple of days for Bill Self and the Kansas Jayhawks. They add Paul Mbiya, the Giant center, and they also added Kohl Rosario, a reclass player, kind of a shooting athletic wing. How do both of those additions affect the roster? How KU wants to play? We're going to get into all that on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to every dayers catching each and every episode of the show, whether you're tuning in on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show or anywhere that you get your audio side of things. Thank you for tuning in to the show and making it your first listen every day. We are going to be breaking down more on the additions of Kohl Rosario and Paul Mbiya for the Kansas basketball roster, what their potential role and how it affects the rest of the team, right? Because their additions don't just have an impact on how are they going to play with KU, but how does it affect competition with somebody else, maybe competing with them for something in the rotation and the team overall for KU. We'll also finish up with some of the latest news around KU as well. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year with Monarch Money. And so we're going to be breaking down Rosario and Mbiya's game on today's edition of the show. Let's start with Kohl Rosario first. So Rosario is the reclassification guard 2026 for KU. That sounds like, by the way, he'll be joining within like a week, which that's great news because that was something we kind of talked about that like, okay, how much of an opportunity is he going to have to play with the team during the summer? Like you think of Johnny Furphy and he didn't join the team till like August. And yeah, Furphy ended up being a starter later in the season, but it took some injuries. It took some other players not playing well. And he, wasn't a starter at the beginning of the year. Well, sounds like Kohl Rosario is going to be joining soon. So he'll have missed a little bit of time, but he'll have, I would think, plenty of time to establish himself as a possible rotation player for KU should everything kind of come together. So that's huge for his potential early playing time and kind of getting in that Bill Self circle of trust. As far as the ceiling role, what it looks like for Kohl Rosario versus the floor role, we'll do that with Mbiya too. For Rosario, I think the ceiling role looks like, he's one of the best three-point shooters on the team. He's athletic, he hustles, he gets rebounds, right? And that he is part of the 8 most trusted guys on the Bill Self team. And when the rotation gets cut down in bigger games or later in the season, he's part of that rotation still. And he's, making a big impact in doing those things specifically for KU. I think the floor, what it looks like in the realistic worst case scenario, so to speak, is that he's just not part of the rotation. And that could be because Bill Self either plays a smaller rotation that just has like 7 guys, or it could be from a standpoint of like, what if Jamari McDowell, just having more experience, beats him out? Or, what if KU opts to like, if you figure your starting 5 plus one of the bench guards plus your backup big and then your 8th man, what if the 8th man ends up being they just want to steer into even more athleticism and having another wing who can play the 3-4, and they end up going with Samis Calderon in that role. And so Rosario ends up being just kind of a fringe rotation player where he's playing spot minutes in year 1. That would be the, I think, floor situation there for Rosario. But either way, I do like his future with KU, that's to say the least. My guess on the role personally is that, yeah, I think you're looking at a competition between like Rosario, Calderon, and some of these other guys. I am right now expecting Rosario to be a rotation player for KU. Again, I have a hard time seeing him jump ahead of some of those guys, maybe in the top 7 when you're looking at, the really 4 main guards that you have with Council, Dawson, Jackson, and Peterson. When you add in Trey White, when you add in the 2 bigs, Floyd Badunga, and then whoever the backup big, whether it's Paul Mbiya or Bryson Tiller, we'll get to that in our second segment here. But that's 7 guys. Like it's hard to see him jumping over Elmarko or jumping over Jayden Dawson. I guess it is possible. Like Rosario's a really good athlete, and if he does end up being the best 3-point shooter on the team, maybe that is worth something, right? But there is room for an 8-man rotation and him being that 8th guy. So like, that's kind of where I view it right now, that, okay, maybe Calderon has a leg up right now because he's been practicing with the team. But given the combination of this team needs shooting with the fact that he is going to be joining soon, that he's still going to have an opportunity to play and get acclimated with the team. I view that as something where, like, right now, I would be expecting him to be kind of at that back end of the rotation. But what players that, are on the team that could be impacted by that? Well, okay, again, I think he's directly in competition with Noah Shelby, Jamari McDowell, and Samiz Calderon for kind of that final rotation spot. Now, maybe you can make an argument that, the eighth man in the rotation could end up just being another big. What if seventh and eighth men are both bigs with Mbiya and Tiller, right? And then at that point, it's a different conversation. But if we are looking at that next guard up, right, that's the biggest competition I think he has to clear right now. Shelby and McDowell. And McDowell has a little more experience, right? Coming off the redshirt year, this will be his third season at Kansas. When you look at Rosario, probably has a little more juice and maybe more three-point potential than McDowell. But again, how much is that experience worth as far as Noah Shelby is concerned? That's a player who, mostly brings three-point shooting to the table, and that'll be interesting to see if Rosario can be a better three-point shooter than him. I would think the other parts of the game, the all-around pieces of the game, are going to be better for Rosario than they are for Shelby. But yeah, that's kind of the big competition there. But again, the Samiz Calderon part of this becomes very interesting, and you just wonder how much of who plays more, Samiz Calderon or Kohl Rosario, how much does that come down to which player is better versus which fits better? Going back to the idea that, okay, I think Rosario becomes a better fit because you need three-point shooting on this team, but maybe your identity is just to be the most athletic, long team possible, and then maybe Samiz Calderon fits into that as much as possible. So what I find interesting is what fuels the other in that situation, right? Are you playing, like, is the fact that if Kohl Rosario looks better in the offseason than Samiz Calderon, does that turn into the style that you play where you have the extra three-point shooter versus if Calderon is the one that outplays him, then do you decide to steer into that all the way through? I think that'll be kind of the most interesting of the competitions, is just who's better between Calderon and Rosario. And yes, both players can play the three, so there is a little bit of overlap there, but it's interesting because Calderon's more of like a 3-4, whereas Rosario is probably more of a 2-3. So they're slightly different players, but whichever one wins out, that kind of steers the way that Bill Self has to use the rotation, has to use the roster, has to use other minutes, right? Because if Samiz Calderon is the one that wins out, okay, now you don't have to play Trey White as many minutes at the 4 because you have Samiz Calderon who can come in and play some 4 minutes, versus if Kohl Rosario wins out, maybe that means Trey White's playing even more minutes at the 4, so you can play more of your guards 1 through 3. And really that would mean that you're going to have a lot of a essentially combo guard at the 3 at that point, right? Because if Rosario wins out in that situation, you're talking about Dawson, who's a 2-3, Rosario, who's a 2-3, Council and Elmarko, who are kind of 1-2s, and Peterson, who's kind of just a unicorn and can do anything, as being guys who would be playing 1 through 3 for this team, right? It wouldn't be like a true wing at the 3 necessarily. So it'll be very interesting who wins between kind of that competition to determine kind of style of play as well for KU. And I guess, again, like if you want to talk just pure potential, if you want to talk athleticism and three-point shooting, is there any world where like Kohl Rosario could beat out like Jayden Dawson if you're just looking at the prototype of, okay, both players are 2-3s, both players are expected to be some of the better three-point shooters on the team? Does Rosario have more bounce than Dawson? Dawson's got a good amount of bounce. But I guess in a world where Kohl Rosario is a late riser, like is that Johnny Furphy type of player, if he is Christian Braun as a freshman, right? Those guys ended up surprising people with how big their roles would end up being. Maybe even more so Christian Braun in what that first year was. And then at that point, if you're getting to that level, you are talking about somebody you were expecting to play big minutes has to get docked because it's, you don't just get to create extra minutes. So maybe that would be the one that I'm looking at. I don't think that's a likely scenario, to be clear. Okay, let's get to Paul Mbiya. What does he bring to the table? Who does he affect? Who's he in competition with? All that next on Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. You stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. They have all-in-one convenience where instead of juggling multiple apps and you're going from tab to tab and then all of a sudden you got to re-log in. No, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year with Monarch Money. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the show. And don't forget, you make Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. Derek Johnson here with Locked On Jayhawks. So we're going to be breaking down more on what Kansas still has left to do in the offseason. Are they going to do anything? We'll have plenty more content about the KU basketball roster. Seems like things are a little more set now. We can maybe start doing minutes and lineups projections. So we get all that coming at you. And KU football content will be coming at you, I promise, sometime soon here with Locked On Jayhawks. All right, what about Paul Mbiya and his potential role with the team? I did want to mention in the same way that, brought up Kohl Rosario could be here next week. With Mbiya, I don't know the answer to when he'll be here, but the fact that Rosario could be here next week, because I guess summer semester gets split up into, there's two different periods of summer classes. So that means that Mbiya theoretically could, be here next week too, and that would be a big boon to get him aboard as early as possible as well. There was an interview done with Dushan London over in 24/7 Sports where he talked with Paul Mbiya, and one of the quotes that he gave I thought was really cool. He said, "One of my mentors and vet at Asvel, which was the French team that he was playing for, was Tariq Black, and he really encouraged me to commit there." That's pretty cool. You get a grad transfer guy for 1 year in Tariq Black, and he ends up being somebody who's a proponent for the university, for the school. That's really cool. And he also mentions Joel Embiid went there too. This was something we mentioned the other day when Paul Mbiya committed, that you wonder if with all these centers that they've gotten from the continent of Africa, I mean, Joel Embiid's got to be Joel Embiid's huge in the NBA. He's huge here in the States, right? He's a MVP winner. In Africa, being somebody who is from Cameroon, the fact that he can champion that, I'm sure he is a fan favorite over there in the same way that, Shohei Ohtani is a fan favorite in Japan, right? And so having Kansas across your chest from there, but also having other guys that have carried that torch along, it can't hurt. And I think that kind of proves it right there with that quote. I should probably also mention this. They also, in the release that Bill Self, he talked about him being a freshman, which that's exciting. We weren't sure what year he was going to be deemed by the NCAA, if he would be a sophomore or a junior even. Turns out he's going to be a freshman. That is awesome to hear for Kansas that he'll be a freshman, because it gives you the potential of him being here 4 years. And you do have to operate in today's age of college basketball with everything's a 1 year roster to a certain standpoint, but you think of, I guess, Flory Badunga, could he go pro after this season? And then it's who's going to be your starting center? Well, it's nice to have a guy you can develop in Mbiya to maybe be the starting center of the future. Though they just released his rating on 24/7 Sports, only a 90 rating. I say only, that's still a 4-star prospect, which is solid. But it's just outside the top 200 overall, which makes you question, are we sure? Okay, Bryson Tiller was a top 20, top 25 recruit, and we're viewing Mbiya as the guy who's going to be in over him. But then again, Mbiya is older, so it's okay, is this saying he was a 90 rated recruit technically when he was 18, and he's had 2 more years to develop since then? So I don't know how that works. I don't know. It's kind of difficult. But anyway, the ceiling role in that same way that we went about with Rosario, I think the ceiling role for Mbiya is he is playing all of the backup center minutes. That, Flory's playing 24, 25, 26 minutes per game. Mbiya is gobbling up the rest, right? And that's good for 15, 16 minutes per game. He's one of the best backup bigs in the country. He's one of the best backup rim protectors in the country. He's a good rebounder. He's dunking the basketball. He's shooting at a high efficiency. And you feel like you have the best 1-2 center punch in the conference, right? That would be the ceiling outcome here. The floor outcome in terms of what things could look like is that, you're talking about a player who 24/7, for whatever reason, rated outside the top 200. And I'm not saying I agree with that, but if the floor outcome is that, that means that's not really a rotation player. Now, maybe by necessity, because Kansas doesn't have a lot of big depth, that player becomes a rotation player for Kansas. And I sit here and think, I don't mean any offense to Mitch Lightfoot, who had a great Kansas career. He was here a long time, He hustled his butt off. He ended up having one of the most efficient hook shots in the country his final year at Kansas, and was a very serviceable backup big who was playing 12, 15 minutes a night, getting blocks and making hook shots all over the floor. Like, had a nice Kansas career. Then, he's going to be remembered for a long time for that, right? But it's just funny when you look at recruiting rankings and it's like Mitch Lightfoot is this like quasi top 100 recruit who's a basically 6'8" center, whereas Paul Mbiya, who has like a 7'8" wingspan, can't crack the top 200. Again, this was not meant as a slight on Lightfoot. It's not at all. Lightfoot had an awesome career for everything that he did at Kansas. I'm just saying, point being, you would think the guy with the 7'8" wingspan would maybe have a little bit higher potential and be ranked high. Anyway, I don't mean to like blast into that, but the floor role, yeah, it's that I guess Bryson Tiller is healthy and Mbiya, it takes some time, and that Bill Self feels like he can't really trust him, and that he's still probably playing a little bit here and there. Like, you think back to some of the rosters in like 2016-17, 2017-18, where, maybe you had Landon Lucas who you could trust, or maybe you had Udoka Azubuike in 17-18 that you could trust. But when those guys had to go to the bench, it was like, who are you going to trust? Do you trust Carlton Bragg? Do you trust Dwight Colby? And the answer was kind of not really for Bill Self, but it's like, I don't really have another player to throw out there, And so you wonder if that's what it becomes, like where the floor is that he's only playing a handful of minutes per game, whereas the ceiling is 15, and the floor he gets beat out by Bryson Tiller. What I think the most likely scenario is it's somewhere in between there. He's playing 8, 10, 12 minutes per game, and by limiting the role, it doesn't matter if he has foul trouble as much. You're just telling him to go grab the ball on rebounds, dunk the ball when it's thrown up to you, and block shots on the inside. And it's kind of a more simplified role that I think he'll be just fine in if you can make that kind of the situation. Now, what other players are impacted by him? Well, I think it's clear he's behind Flory. I don't really see a scenario where it's like, oh, Paul Mbiya is so good that you have to play Flory and Mbiya the same amount of minutes. They're both getting 20 minutes per game. I don't necessarily see that as being the situation here. So to me, the competition is more so just about Mbiya versus Tiller for the backup 5. And Tiller, I think, can play some 4 and some 5. With Mbiya, I think you're looking at him just playing the 5 based on kind of what their games are and bring to the table. But yeah, I mean, if you're going by recruiting rankings, you would make Tiller the favorite in that discussion. It's just funny that we view Mbiya. Maybe it's because the injury stuff with Tiller. Maybe it's because Mbiya is more of the classic center, whereas again, Tiller is more of kind of the tweener of the 4-5. But that'll be a fun competition to see with who kind of wins out on that. And then theoretically, and this kind of loops in Tiller to all this, if Tiller and Mbiya, their competition is a really good competition because both players are playing well, then maybe you do start talking yourself into playing a little bit more 2-big basketball, 10 minutes a night of 2-big basketball, versus if it's just, oh no, like, I don't know how much we can trust him, but he's super long and we think he can just be an athlete out there for 5 minutes a night, then you're not probably playing any 2-big basketball. And then maybe that goes back to the Kohl Rosario conversation where it's like, yeah, but we really need Samiz Calderon because we need him to give us some 4 minutes, right? That becomes interesting. Or does Kansas, just roll out and they're cool with playing, basically a 6'5" guy at the 4 and just dealing with it and having a center who can block shots, whether it's Flory or Mbiya in there, or a guy in Tiller who has like a 7'2" wingspan as well. Very interesting how some of the puzzle pieces will kind of be fitting for this KU rotation on roster. So we'll break that down plenty more, give a full minutes projection and stuff in an upcoming show as well. But let's finish up with some latest news. Frank Mason is going to be playing in the TBT again, but not for Kansas. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, which is brought to you by Rugiet. You've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. You can even check out some of the customer reviews on their website. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. You can head to rugiet.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get 15% off today. That's rugiet.com, rugiet.com/lockedoncollege, and use promo code lockedoncollege for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks again. Whether you join us on our audio side or our YouTube side, really appreciate you. And let's get those YouTube subscribers up. Let's get that thing to 4K by the start of the football season. How about that? Okay, some of the latest news. Frank Mason, all-time Kansas great, all-time beloved Kansas guard. He is not going to be playing for Kansas, though, in the TBT, which is unfortunate because last year we got to see Frank in the TBT for Kansas, and I think it was just a lot of fun for Kansas fans to get into it. You know, some people get into the TBT for overall, I do. Some people just get into the Kansas side of things. Some people maybe just got into it last year just because they wanted to see Frank Mason play again. And maybe they're not going to this year. So Kansas has a team, Jayhawks, JHX, and it's a little light on guards right now. I think 7-man roster. It's only 2 guards, and both of them are more shooting guards, LaGerald Vick and Nick Timberlake. So they need to find a way to add more guards, which you would think. You think back to a lot of the Bill Self years, the recent years, the guys who are still active. You would think there's a lot of good guards out there. So I don't know. Maybe they just have some guys who have committed, but they can't fully sign in until their next European contract comes in or doesn't, or they have to figure out if they can play in it or not. Like, I don't know. I'm sure they'll get somebody, and hopefully they do. But big blow to not have Frank. Now, he's going to be playing for Boeheim's Army, which is the Syracuse team. So this is the behind Jerry McNamara, this is the second worst thing that Syracuse has done to Kansas. But in all honesty, like I understand it. It's unfortunate at the same point in time. So there was actually some quotes from Frank Mason, like talking about just getting to be so happy to play again with kind of the Kansas adjacent, I guess, uniform last year and play in front of Kansas fans. And so that kind of feels like it now goes the wrong way, where it's like, okay, then why don't you want to do it again? And so it sucks. But I also understand it because this is the TBT. This isn't playing again college basketball for Kansas. As much as it is a Kansas alumni team, there isn't actually ties. And so how this works is like Boeheim's Army, they've been known in the TBT, and other TBT teams do this as well. I don't know if the KU team does or not, but the Boeheim's Army one, it becomes a very big deal for them. They actually pay their players. Not just like how the TBT works is if the team wins it all, they win $1 million for winning it all. And so some teams, it's boom or bust. It's you ain't winning anything unless you win the whole thing. There are certain teams where, okay, that's going to be your big money if you win, but you're going to get paid per game by your team to where you're getting something out of it as well. And I've always heard Boeheim's Army is one of those teams. So you could understand from a standpoint of like, okay, Frank Mason's not in the NBA. Like, he's not making millions of dollars every year. I'm sure he's still making good money in Europe. I don't know. Maybe he is making $1 million in Europe because he's a really good basketball player, right? But it's not the same as like you see some of these NBA contracts where, I don't know, Daniel Gafford, like just kind of random center who's like solid, good player for the Mavericks. He's getting like $20 million a year. That's not the case. So you can understand a guy being like, oh, you're going to pay me, whatever this is more. So it is unfortunate. It does suck. Maybe is there any chance he viewed it was a slight because he didn't get one of the assistant coaching positions and now he's trying to stick it again? I don't think that's the case. But I will be still watching Frank Mason play for Boeheim's Army, and I'm going to be excited to do it because I would watch Frank Mason play in a random pickup game on a cruise ship. I don't care. Love watching that dude play. Anyway, this one from college basketball. Scheduling news, the NCAA Division I Council will approve an increase from 31 to 32 games beginning with the 2026 to 2027 season. So that won't be this upcoming season. It'll be the following season. And what that means is there will just be one extra non-con game. So that's an extra opportunity for KU to play a big game or have a bye game. I think this makes sense. When you see some of the salaries too, the players make in college basketball, whether it's NIL, whether it's the rev share, it is interesting because they're making some of these guys are making more than they would get on a second round contract or an end of first round contract if you're just talking one specific year in the NBA. But then it gets especially interesting if you look at it at a per game basis, right? Because in the NBA, you might be playing 80 games. Whereas in college, you're only playing, I guess, with the tournament and everything, you could be playing up to 40 games. So I almost think it makes sense. It wouldn't shock me if it, like, does it make sense for this eventually to be like a 40-game regular season, or for you to eventually have teams play 50 games with the inclusion of regular season plus conference tournament plus postseason? I mean, maybe you just push the year so it's like an October through March thing, right? You started a month earlier for the college basketball season. Would anybody object to having an extra month of Kansas basketball? I wouldn't. All right, give me more stuff to talk about, that's for sure. But I do think this is interesting, and it's always kind of slowly gone up and everything. It's always felt like there's been a big gap from the amount of games you play in college to the amount of games you play in the NBA. So maybe this gets it just a little bit closer. And I'm not gonna, be unhappy about them adding one extra Kansas basketball game. It's like, oh no, I have one extra game that I have to talk about, or one extra game that I get to watch. Oh, bummer. It is just unfortunate though that it's happening before Darren, or it'll happen after Darren Peterson is gone, so we don't get one extra Darren Peterson game. All right, that'll do it for this episode of the show. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. See you next time for another edition of Locked On Jayhawks.